The Pumpkin King. The Pumpkin King is not to be trifled with, unless it's his command, and he only commands it once a year. When a mere gourd of a boy, Hank Fells, entered the Pumpkin King's court on that fateful autumn evening, he had no idea what was in store. The king threw a headless gala where the best courtiers came, and those who did not weren't worthy of an invitation in the first place. Hank pulled at his dress coat of plum linen. It was the finest his family could afford from the lower patches of the east farmlands, and dyed with the plums they saved for a hallowed treat. His mother would hear no less of it, once the summons came. The headless guests were made to remove their pumpkin heads before entering the gala. Mirrors upon the walls created odd sights for Hank, and he was certain that he, too, would have to remove his humble dancing gourd head. However, the guards forbade him, while holding spears topped with the sharpest knives Hank had ever seen. The walk to the Pumpkin King's throne was an eternity. Hank found it easy not to stare at the Pumpkin King with his glowing yellow eyes, as there was too much else to look at from the splendor. Gilded walls and an eerie music upon which there was no source. But it was beautiful, Hank knew, even as a country gourd. He found himself underdressed in his matching plum shorts and his high socks that his sister mended. They still had a hole in the back, but at least she made it into a spider's web so it looked intentional. She was always so clever, his sister, and now he found himself wishing she were here to lead him by the hand to the Pumpkin King's dais. Hank saw silk and taffeta and organza dresses, enveloped in their sways and turns. He was a dancing gourd, but he had never seen such things before. He never even danced, for he always wanted to dance with a daisy gourd, aptly named Daisy, who lived on the neighboring farm. But there were no dances or parties for a simple farm boy and girl. When he mentioned such to Daisy, she laughed at him. But it was a good laugh, Hank thought to himself. The kind of laugh that warms you from the inside, and to prove it, it showed on Daisy herself when her skin went from pale yellow-orange to that of an autumn squash at the reddest part of day. To have Daisy with him now would be a sight, even if she never danced with him and laughed at him in a way that made his skin dewy and squish with rot. He heard of such things, but he never wished to witness it firsthand. "We must all bear our burdens," his father's voice rang in his ears, "and one day we will all return to the earth, my son. The vine cannot last forever, but that is the point, the purpose, and the promise of seedlings." It always embarrassed him when his father spoke of seedlings. Hank walked beneath chandeliers that dangled like spiders, and then was aghast to find they were spiders, the largest and most golden spiders in the land. His reaction caused him to spring back as he walked the Pumpkin King's dark purple carpet, and in a chorus the courtiers tittered and chuckled and laughed without their heads. Hank felt his gourd turning yellow, and he wished a thicker skin. When his eyes met the Pumpkin King's, he felt becalmed, for the king was not laughing at him. He looked down on him with sinister eyes, but their heat was warm and the smile was friendly. Hank didn't know that could be, for it was said the eyes were the heart of the soul, and that while the lips betrayed, the eyes rang true. It's why it was so important to get the eyes right once harvest time was nearing. The eyes opened into the afterlife, it was said, and bridged their hallowed world to the one of the dead. Nervous in his peeled bark shoes, Hank met the steps to the Pumpkin King's throne. He nearly curtsied. What a fool, he thought to himself before he bowed. He knew he would muck this up somehow, and already did so with those spider chandeliers. The Pumpkin King beckoned him forth, and Hank obeyed. He got as close as he dared, and was made to come closer and closer. The Pumpkin King's voice was sweet and rich, and it filled Hank's eyes with tears where he wanted to cry upon the Pumpkin King's request. "But I don't dance, my king," said Hank in a timid voice. He sounded like the boy he looked like. "I don't know how to dance at all." The Pumpkin King smiled and said, but this was his delight, and he urged the boy to fulfill his wish. The music began to turn, and Hank's head turned as well. He felt funny and flushed, but he began to dance as if the spiders above held his limbs on threads. The courtiers clapped, and their whispers came from nowhere. No heads, remember? There were polite chuckles, but it was nothing like Daisy's. It was cool upon his hearing. Hank wanted to bawl and run home to his mother. He turned and tottered, and his arms were out for a partner that didn't exist. He was alone, and he shut his eyes, and he kept them shut as he was made to dance to the tunes of tinkering bells and low, plucked strings. Not even the musicians were visible to him with his eyes open, much less closed. This is not the ball I wanted at all, Hank thought, and he finally cried, and the tears turned his green gourd white from their streaks. But he kept dancing. He danced as his king had not told him to stop. When the music did, there was applause and a hand on Hank's shoulder. He was lifted into a thin embrace, and while he didn't see the eyes of the Pumpkin King, he felt so watched. The Pumpkin King carried Hank Fell out into the foyer, where he was first met by the guards. Hank saw the knives of their spears and thought, "This is it. This is the end. Do it. Just do it. I cannot possibly survive this now." Everything they said was true. The Pumpkin King set Hank on his feet and wiped his eyes. The king took his hand and led him to the front doors of the castle. Hank was shown to a carriage where he would have sprinted home on his own, if not tethered to the Pumpkin King. Hank climbed the steps into the carriage that barely swayed beneath him, and the Pumpkin King shut the door. The carriage with the headless cabby took off, and Hank had grace enough to look back out the window and see the Pumpkin King waving at him. Hank barely managed to get his hand up to the window to do the same. Once the tree sheltered him from the royal view, he buried his face into a black velvet pillow and slept all the way home, hoping that when he awoke, it would have all been a dream. Instead, when the carriage lurched forward, Hank fell to the floor and knocked his head on the ceiling of the carriage inside. When did he get this tall? Hank stumbled out of the carriage and fell to the ground before his family, who came to the edge of the road of their farm. The headless cabby laughed and waved, driving off, and to his great shock, Hank's family beamed and waved off the cabby. Did they not know what he had been through? Hank found his legs, gangly and awkward. His coat was tighter now, and his shorts, well, they were near indecency. Daisy could never see him like this for how it looked like his underclothes. "My son," said his father, embracing him in a hug. This can't be right, thought Hank. He's near as tall as me. No, I'm near as tall as him. You have matured, his mother beamed, grasping his head between her bumpy hands. No, I haven't. Daisy, you look wonderful, said his sister before she giggled. Probably should have made the trousers, but I didn't want to jinx it. Jinx it? Gasped Hank. Not every gourd gains his stripes at the ball, smiled his father, but the ones that do, it's a blessing upon the family and the realm. Why didn't you tell me, said Hank. We didn't want to put pressure on you. To grow before your time, said his mother fondly. Oh, but what a thing to tell the neighbors. Think of the harvest to come. No one this far out in the farmlands has had such an honor. And you, the first dancing gourd we've managed in a century since your great-great-great-grand-uncle Tenny C. Gordon fell. Hank felt his face flushed, but when he touched it, his thick skin was cool and dry. But what about Daisy? What do I do now? Said Hank. We'll find you a proper girl to marry, said his father proudly. To be the honorary dancing gourd is a big thing, son. We'll have to act fast, said his mother. What about Daisy? Slipped from Hank's lips. Her? His sister made a face. You can't marry her. She's a dime a bumpkin. She's beneath you now, son, said his father. Maybe at a time it could have been, but not now. Not with those stripes down your face. Hank felt sick to his stomach as his arms were pulled by his parents to the glow of their front door that looked like the Pumpkin King's eyes, welded shut yet bleeding embers. The cruelest joke. Hank felt as if he had never left the ball. With the bells ringing and the strings of the unfounded instruments being plucked, he felt as if the laughter of headless courtiers would only return, and the strings of chandelier spiders were reborn as his parents' hands pulled him to be harvested for the seeds of their long-awaited dreams. The wind shut the door behind him, and he couldn't look back, being dragged forward. But Daisy...